Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 AM and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Deputy Commander Jose Soto Galindo. Actually, I'm Bill Lundun. I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Friday on KPNW, streaming worldwide at kpnw.com, and welcome to this. All right, here's a look at some of the stories we're following. A group of Russian warships that sailed close to Florida shores are being closely watched by U.S. destroyers. The ships entered the port of Havana Wednesday ahead of Russian military exercises in the Caribbean. A group of Cuban and Russian officials watched at the famous Havana seaside promenade as the Russian missile frigate Admiral Gorshkov entered the port amid a 21-gun salute. Also, the top nuclear-powered submarine, Kazan, was visible outside Havana Harbor before it submerged again. The presence of the Russian warships in Cuba, just 90 miles from U.S. shores, is seen as a gesture of defiance by Vladimir Putin, who last week warned about taking asymmetrical steps and the possibility of sending long-range weapons to third countries to attack Western targets after President Joe Biden allowed Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to strike inside Russia. Speaking to reporters Wednesday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. government had not seen evidence that Russia is placing in or delivering two missiles to Cuba. The senior official said Russian ships have also been sailing to Havana under past administrations, but he also admitted that elements of this trip are different. They are, in his words, distinct, like, for instance, the Kazan submarine. Last year, Air Force General Glenn Van Herk, at the time, was the chief of the U.S. Northern Command, and he told Congress that the Russian deployment off U.S. coasts of Yeltsin-class cruise missile submarines, like the Kazan, is a growing cause of concern. He said, at that time, now not only the Atlantic, but we have them in the Pacific. It's just a matter of time, probably a year or two, before that's a persistent threat 24 hours a day. And a year later, here we are. Well, in the latest alarming national security threat, 8 suspected terrorists with ties to ISIS were arrested on immigration violations in a joint U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement injunction, along with the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. Now, all 8 are Tajikistan illegal aliens who crossed the southern border last spring. The illegals went through the screening process by U.S. officials, but nothing immediately turned up, and as typical under this administration, they were released into the country. Now, what's really interesting here will come up in a second about these people coming into the country, in particular, one of them. So after the terrorists were allowed to come in and roam freely in the U.S., information was flagged regarding their potential terrorist ties. The incident echoes of a similar story of an Afghan illegal who should have been detained by DHS, but was released from custody twice. He had suspected ties to ISIS, but he was not flagged during his screening at the border. The information only came to light after he was released to wander around in the country. Just last week, Director of the FBI, Wray, told the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee, quote, "We've seen the threat from foreign terrorists on the rise to a whole nother level," in his words, after October 7th. Over the past 8 months, Wray has repeatedly sounded the alarm about threats against the security of the U.S., and it's fallen on deaf ears. One vector for threats to enter the country, according to the FBI chief, is the U.S.-Mexico border. Beyond that, it's been reported that 6 of those suspects also have Russian citizenship. The 8 were nabbed in New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles in a coordinated law enforcement sting. One was heard talking on a wiretap about a bomb. Interestingly enough, this guy was let into the country And he had already been involved with law enforcement a year before and was supposed to have a court date next year after he was kicked out of the country. And they let him in again? All right, this was a story that gained a certain amount of national prominence, and it had to do with a sister's rodeo with a fairly nasty bull named Party Bus who decided to break through a fence and create a little carnage. Now, Party Bus is a 3-year-old bull, and he was bred for bucking, and he has now performed at his first and last rodeo. Party Bus made the headlines when he jumped through the fence in a crowded area, careened through the concessions area, and ragdolled 3 people. The bull made a mistake and didn't intend to hurt anyone, according to the bull's owner, Mike Corey. And he added it was the first time Party Bus had been around that many people. And the bull made a mistake, and he didn't intend to hurt anyone. That conversation must have been really awkward for Mr. Corey. Party Bus, what do you do? I didn't mean to. I was nervous. Anyway, after charging through the rodeo grounds, the bull then ran to a livestock pen where the professionals there got him locked up. Thad Olson, who's the fire chief there in Sisters, said one person had their arm broken, another person hurt their head and neck, and then there was the woman, if you saw the videos, that was tossed in the air a couple of times and ragdolled, and believe it or not, she had the least serious of all the injuries. Corey said that he was disappointed that the bull's first rodeo was his last. Now, Party Bus was bred from an award-winning bull, according to Corey, and he was trained for bucking with a remote-controlled dummy. I want one. And while Corey wishes the bull could have been given a second chance, he says he's not going to push it, and now Party Bus will simply be used for breeding. That's never happened to me when I've been fired. What's up with that? All right, our favorite teachers union, the Portland Association of Teachers, is back at it in Portland. Now, this is the group that, of course, posted materials on their website dealing with teaching kids to be anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. And apparently they're just fixated on their anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian Hamas virtue signaling, and so not doing the job of teaching. Here's your latest case in point. The union representing public school teachers in Portland is now asking candidates for city office whether Portland should do more to respond to, in their words, quote, the ongoing genocide in Palestine. The union is using a questionnaire to decide which candidates deserve their endorsement in the expanded Portland City Council races that'll be happening in that city in November. The Portland Association of Teachers sent the questionnaire to city council candidates prior to a May 30th group endorsement interview. 2 of the questions read, and I'll quote them, do you believe Portland elected officials have done their due diligence in responding to the ongoing genocide in Palestine? No bias there. And has Portland done enough for Palestine, or does more work need to be done? That's kind of a loaded question, sort of like, have you quit beating your wife yet? I mean, regardless of how you answer that question, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. The Pat PAC has brought in groups of candidates from voting districts 2, 3, and 4 over the last month, and then the union issued its endorsements in those districts in early June, which maybe for those candidates, they might consider that the kiss of death. Candidates who participated in the interviews said that one of the first questions the union asked was whether candidates supported police violence against protests, specifically referencing local pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Other questions submitted had to do with Portland police response and the Portland School Board's decision to allow Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps program to be established. They don't like that. Another asked if candidates would commit to keeping police out of schools. Now, what they're talking about there are school resource officers, and the union leadership just hates them because they're police officers, ACAB, and all that. The candidates were also asked about economic disparities. According to Pat Union President Angela Bonilla, questions around police violence and societal class dynamics do not depart from education. You know what's really interesting here? They didn't ask questions like, what are you going to do to help Portland schools? What are you going to do to keep Portland schools safe? What are you going to do to keep the drug criminals that just wander Portland streets like hordes of zombies? What are you going to do to maybe protect our bus stops or something? But they didn't. And there's more. The teachers' union there in Portland continues to double down on its anti-Israel, pro-Palestine lesson plans, now for kids as young as kindergarten. There's another guide on the Portland Teachers Union website for kids as young as kindergarten to help prepare them to what to expect if they attend a protest. The guide is entitled, "So You Made It to a Protest!" And it lists signs, police, ambulances, tear gas, and shutter bombs among the things, quote, you might see, you kindergarten protesters, you. Lesson plans on the Portland Teachers website drew condemnation from Jewish leaders last week. We told you about it last week. And we told you that the union reposted that stuff. And now we're finding out that actually all this other stuff, they removed it and then posted it to a more discreet location online. And that guide urged public school students to pray to Allah, make posters, and write letters in support of Palestinians. The activity book specifically asked kids to write out a prayer to Allah for Palestinian people. Now, we told you last week that Union President Angela Bonilla said that she had the union take the lessons plan and other educational resources down after widespread criticism to pause and review. Well, apparently the pause and review was short, less than 24 hours, because after they disappeared from the website, they were back up Thursday afternoon, buried deeply inside. And speaking of Portland's infatuation with protesting for Palestine, 8 people were arrested during the annual Portland Grand Floral Parade for attempting to block the parade route. The pro-Hamas protesters were arrested after pushing through a line of officers and laying down in the middle of the street in front of the parade. Officers learned of the potential protest, and they'd already approached the group and told them, okay, you can be there, you can engage in free speech, but do not disrupt the parade route. And the group said, oh, we're not going to interrupt the parade. And then, of course, they did. The 8 protesters arrested were all charged with second-degree conduct. Another was charged with harassment and interfering with a police officer after splashing officers with a beverage and throwing a can of a yet unknown liquid at them. Police also noted it was the only disturbance during the parade. And then immediately afterwards, local anarchist groups on social media called for their release, and I'm serious, deemed the Portland Rose Festival parade, quote, a genocide parade. Okay, so let's end with something happy. So at one point in time in the capital city of Salem, here in Oregon, there was only one high school. And members of the Salem High School class of 1944 gather every year to reminisce about when there was only one high school, pose for the obligatory photographs, sign yearbooks, and toast what they consider to be the greatest graduating class Salem ever had. Now, the Guinness World Book of Records has notified the Salem High School class of 1944 they hold the world's record for the longest-running class reunion. One of the alumni, Gail Crozier-Prim, says, "That's pretty exciting for us." And Simple Math says that this year is their 80th class year reunion. And I point that out because many of Rick's viewers were educated in Oregon. Their commencement was June 1st, 1944, and it was just 5 days before D-Day. 9 of the 368 students in the class, all boys, did not walk across the stage that day to receive their diplomas because they had already left to fight in the war. The commencement program at the time highlighted their names. Like most high school graduating classes, though, the class of 1944 met every 5 years in the beginning, then they went to every other year, and now they meet every year. Happy 80th reunion. This look at the news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental, where they use space-age technology like this deadly death ray to clean your teeth and clean the cooties that live in your mouth. And they also only use American-made crowns. I know, because I'm getting one soon. All right, Rick, it's time for you to roll out a big old industrial-sized oozing can of real.